The moment my boss, Marcus Thompson, slammed my termination papers on his glass desk, I knew my family would have a field day. Insubordinate, he called me. Lacks team spirit, the paperwork read. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. What he really meant was that I had dared to suggest his precious digital marketing agency could actually innovate instead of recycling the same tired strategies from 2015. 3 months later, when I walked into his office as the new owner of Thompson Digital Solutions, the look on his face was worth every sleepless night, every family dinner where they reminded me I was the Martinez failure, every moment of doubt that nearly broke me. Sometimes the biggest betrayals come not from enemies, but from the people who are supposed to believe in you most. What happened next didn't just change my bank account. It transformed how my entire family saw success, failure, and what it really means to take a risk worth taking. The elevator ride down from the 14th floor of the Austin Tech Tower felt like the longest 40 seconds of my life. My cardboard box of personal belongings sat heavy in my arms, containing 3 years of my life at Thompson Digital Solutions, a coffee mug from my college graduation, a small succulent that somehow survived under fluorescent lights, and a framed photo of my family at our restaurant's 20th anniversary celebration. The irony wasn't lost on me that the same family smiling in that picture would probably be serving me a healthy dose of "I told you so" within the hour. Austin's downtown buzzed with its usual energy as I stepped onto the sidewalk, the March heat already promising another scorching Texas summer. Food trucks lined the streets, their owners calling out lunch specials to office workers who still had jobs to return to. The contrast between their entrepreneurial hustle and my sudden unemployment felt sharp and immediate. Here I was, 28, years old with a marketing degree from UT Austin, clutching a box like some corporate cliché while food truck owners built their dreams one customer at a time. My phone buzzed incessantly in my pocket, but I ignored it. News traveled fast in Austin's tight-knit Latino community, and I already knew who was calling. My mother, Rosa, had probably heard from Mrs. Gonzalez, who heard from her daughter who worked at the coffee shop in the building lobby, who saw me leaving with my belongings. The Austin grapevine was more efficient than any social media platform. Thompson Digital Solutions occupied an entire floor of one of downtown's newer buildings, all exposed brick and industrial lighting designed to scream creative innovation, while the actual work happening inside was anything but innovative. For 3 years, I had watched Marcus Thompson, a 45-year-old man who still used phrases like synergy and pivot unironically, run the agency with strategies that were outdated when I was in college. His client retention rate was terrible, his employee turnover worse, and his management style belonged in a museum of corporate dysfunction. The final straw had come during Tuesday's monthly strategy meeting, when Marcus presented yet another campaign built around generic stock photos and buzzwords like authentic engagement and meaningful connections. I had spent weeks researching emerging trends in digital marketing, studying how successful agencies were using AI-driven personalization and micro-influencer partnerships to create actual results for their clients. When I raised my hand to suggest we modernize our approach, Marcus had looked at me like I had suggested we start conducting business in ancient Latin. "Jessica, we appreciate your enthusiasm," he had said with that condescending smile I had grown to hate. "But we have systems that work. Our clients trust our proven methods." The emphasis he placed on proven methods made it clear that my suggestions were unwelcome disruptions to his comfortable routine. What Marcus called proven methods, I called professional negligence. In the past year alone, we had lost 6 major clients to competitors who offered more sophisticated analytics, better audience targeting, and campaigns that actually moved the needle on their clients' bottom lines. I had watched potential clients walk out of presentations because our proposals looked like they were created in 2010. But pointing out these uncomfortable truths apparently made me difficult to work with and not aligned with company culture. The drive to East Austin took 20 minutes in midday traffic, giving me too much time to rehearse the conversation I was about to have with my family. Martinez Family Restaurant sat on a corner lot where East Austin's rapid gentrification met. Its historic Latino roots, a perfect metaphor for the cultural tension that had defined my entire life. The building itself was a converted house from the 1940s, with mismatched chairs, walls covered in family photos spanning 3 generations, and the constant aroma of my grandmother's secret spice blend that had kept customers coming back for 2 decades. My father Carlos had bought the restaurant when I was 5 years old, pouring his life savings and every ounce of his energy into creating something he could pass down to his children. The American dream, he called it, even when the long hours and razor-thin profit margins left him exhausted most nights. He had built it from a tiny taqueria into a neighborhood institution, the kind of place where regulars had their own tables, and first dates became marriage proposals over plates of his famous mole poblano. But success in the restaurant business, I had learned, was measured differently than success in the corporate world. While my father counted success in satisfied customers and community connections, the rest of my family had different expectations for their children. My older sister Sophia had fulfilled those expectations perfectly, graduating from law school and landing a position at one of Austin's most prestigious firms. She owned a condo downtown, drove a BMW, and attended charity galas where she networked with the city's elite. She was the Martinez family success story, the proof that hard work and education could elevate us beyond our working-class roots. I was supposed to be the second success story. The marketing degree, the corporate job, the steady paycheck and benefits package, all evidence that the Martinez family was moving up in the world. Except now I was walking into the restaurant at 2 p.m. on a Wednesday, carrying a cardboard box and the kind of news that would confirm every doubt my family had ever harbored about my career choices. The lunch rush was winding down when I pushed through the front door, the familiar chime announcing my arrival to the handful of customers finishing their meals. My mother Rosa looked up from the register, her expression shifting from surprise to concern as she registered my midweek presence and the obvious signs of professional displacement. "Mija, what are you doing here?" she asked in the mixture of Spanish and English that had been the soundtrack of my childhood. "Shouldn't you be at work?" Before I could answer, my younger brother Danny emerged from the kitchen, wiping his hands on his apron. At 25, Danny had never worked anywhere except the family restaurant, starting as a busboy in high school and working his way up to assistant manager. He had turned down a scholarship to study business at Texas State, choosing instead to stay home and help build the family legacy. His decision had been celebrated as loyalty and dedication, while every career move I made seemed to be viewed with skepticism about whether I was abandoning my roots. "Let me guess," Danny said, his tone already carrying the weight of family disapproval. "Another one of your brilliant ideas got you in trouble at work?" The assumption stung because it wasn't entirely wrong. My brilliant ideas had indeed gotten me fired, but not for the reasons Danny imagined. Throughout my 3 years at Thompson Digital, I had consistently suggested improvements, innovations, and strategies that could have transformed the agency from a mediocre service provider into an industry leader. I had researched competitors, analyzed market trends, and developed comprehensive proposals for modernizing everything from our client onboarding process to our creative development workflow. But in Danny's worldview, shaped by 25 years of restaurant operations where tradition and consistency were valued above innovation, my suggestions probably sounded like the complaints of someone who couldn't appreciate good fortune when she had it. The stability of a corporate job, regular hours, and predictable income were luxuries that restaurant workers rarely enjoyed. From his perspective, I was ungrateful for opportunities he had never been offered. My father appeared from the back office, drawn by the sound of our conversation and the unmistakable tension that accompanied family discussions about career disappointments. Carlos Martinez was 58 years old, with hands that showed decades of kitchen work and eyes that reflected the weight of providing for a family while building a business from nothing. He had immigrated from Guadalajara at 19, speaking limited English and carrying dreams that seemed impossible to everyone except himself. "Jessica, what brings you home so early?" he asked, though his expression suggested he already suspected. The answer wasn't going to be good news. I set the cardboard box on one of the empty tables and took a deep breath, preparing to deliver the news that would undoubtedly trigger a family discussion about responsibility, gratitude, and the importance of keeping stable employment in an uncertain world. "I got fired today," I said simply, deciding that direct honesty was better than trying to soften the blow with explanations they wouldn't understand or appreciate. The silence that followed felt heavier than the humid Austin air. My mother's hand went to her heart in that dramatic gesture she had perfected over decades of reacting to her children's various crises. Danny shook his head with the satisfaction of someone whose predictions had been proven correct. My father's expression remained carefully neutral, but I could see him calculating the implications of having another family member without steady income. "Fired?" Rosa repeated, as if saying the word again might change its meaning. "What did you do, mija?" The assumption that I must have done something wrong to deserve termination was typical of my family's approach to conflict with authority. Figures. In their experience, bosses were generally right, employees who caused trouble were generally wrong, and job security was too precious to risk on principles or pride. The idea that I might have been fired for being too innovative rather than not innovative enough was outside their frame of reference. I suggested too many changes, I explained, knowing that the explanation would sound like confirmation of their worst fears about my character. Marcus thought I was being disruptive to company culture. Danny laughed, not with humor, but with the bitter satisfaction of someone whose cynicism had been validated. "So you got fired for not knowing when to keep your mouth shut? That's just great, Jessica. Really professional." His reaction triggered something defensive in me, a frustration that had been building for years as I watched my family interpret every career challenge as evidence of personal failure rather than systemic problems or missed opportunities for growth. They had spent so much energy celebrating Sophia's conventional success that they couldn't recognize innovation or entrepreneurship as valid alternatives to climbing someone else's corporate ladder. "I got fired," I said, my voice rising slightly, "for trying to help a failing company actually succeed instead of continuing to lose clients with outdated strategies." "Failing company?" my father interjected, his tone sharp with disapproval. "Jessica, you had a good job with benefits and steady pay. You think every company that doesn't do things your way is failing?" The question revealed the fundamental difference between our perspectives on work, success, and professional growth. For Carlos, who had built his restaurant through decades of incremental improvements and careful attention to customer satisfaction, the idea of challenging established systems seemed unnecessarily risky. He had achieved success by perfecting traditional approaches, not by disrupting them. But I had spent 3 years watching Thompson Digital Solutions hemorrhage clients because Marcus refused to acknowledge that the marketing industry was evolving faster than his willingness to adapt. I had seen competitors steal business with strategies I had recommended months earlier. I had watched talented colleagues leave for agencies that valued innovative thinking over corporate conformity. "Dad, the company was actually failing," I insisted. "They lost 6 major clients in the past year because their strategies are outdated. I was trying to help them modernize before they lost everything." "And now you have nothing." Sophia's voice came from the restaurant entrance, where she stood in her perfectly tailored business suit, checking her phone with the casual confidence of someone whose career trajectory had never included unexpected detours. My sister's timing was impeccable, as always. Sophia had an uncanny ability to arrive at family crises precisely when her presence would maximize the contrast between her success and everyone else's struggles. She approached our impromptu family meeting with the measured stride of someone accustomed to commanding corporate boardrooms. "I heard about what happened," she continued, slipping her phone into her designer handbag. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Mrs. Chen called Mom after she saw you leaving the building with your belongings. "This is exactly what I was worried about when you took that job." Sophia's prediction that my career would eventually implode had been a constant undercurrent in family conversations for the past 3 years. She had never directly criticized my work at Thompson Digital, but her questions about job security, advancement opportunities, and long-term prospects had made it clear that she viewed my position as unstable compared to her own trajectory in corporate law. "What you were worried about?" I asked, feeling the familiar tension that accompanied conversations with my sister about professional success. "What exactly were you worried about, Sophia?" "I was worried that you'd never learned how to work within established systems," she replied with the calm authority of someone who had mastered the art of professional diplomacy. "Corporate success requires understanding hierarchy, respecting established processes, and building consensus before proposing major changes." Her analysis stung because it contained elements of truth wrapped in assumptions about my professional competence. Sophia had succeeded in corporate law precisely because she understood how to navigate complex organizational structures, build strategic alliances, and implement change through careful relationship management. Her approach to career advancement was methodical and politically astute. But what she interpreted as my failure to understand corporate dynamics, I saw as my refusal to accept mediocrity disguised as stability. Thompson Digital Solutions hadn't failed because I lacked political skills or professional maturity. It was failing because Marcus Thompson prioritized comfort over competence, and because employees like me were expected to enable that dysfunction rather than challenge it. "Understanding hierarchy," I replied, "shouldn't mean watching your company lose clients because the boss refuses to acknowledge that his strategies stopped working 5 years ago." "And now you're unemployed," Danny added helpfully, "which really shows how effective your approach was." The family intervention was proceeding exactly as I had anticipated during the drive from downtown. Each family member was responding according to their established role in our family dynamic. Rosa with worry and emotional drama, Carlos with disappointment wrapped in practical concerns, Danny with cynical satisfaction, and Sophia with condescending analysis designed to reinforce her position as the family's professional success story. What none of them understood was that getting fired from Thompson Digital Solutions had been the catalyst I needed to finally pursue the idea that had been developing in my mind for over a year. Every frustration with Marcus's outdated methods, every client presentation that fell flat, every talented colleague who left for better opportunities had been building toward a realization about what the digital marketing industry actually needed. But explaining that realization to my family would require them to see me as someone capable of building something rather than just joining something. It would require them to believe that the same qualities they viewed as professional liabilities, my willingness to challenge authority, my impatience with ineffective systems, my tendency to suggest radical improvements, might actually be entrepreneurial assets. "What are you going to do now?" my mother asked, her voice carrying the weight of genuine concern, mixed with fear about how this latest crisis would affect the family's carefully constructed narrative of upward mobility. The question hung in the air between us, surrounded by the familiar sounds and smells of the restaurant that had defined my childhood. 3 generations of Martinez family photos watched from the walls, documenting decades of hard work, sacrifice, and gradual progress toward the American dream. The weight of their expectations, their fears, and their definitions of success felt heavier than the humid Austin afternoon. I looked around at my family, These people who loved me but couldn't understand me, who supported me but couldn't envision me, who wanted the best for me but could only define best in terms of security and conformity. They were waiting for me to ask for help finding another corporate job, to admit that my approach to professional growth had been misguided, to accept their guidance toward a more conventional path. Instead, I reached into my purse and pulled out a business plan I had been developing for the past 6 months, a document that represented everything Thompson Digital Solutions could have become if Marcus had been willing to listen to new ideas instead of clinging to old failures. "I'm going to start my own agency," I said, placing the folder on the table between us. "And I'm going to do everything Marcus was too scared to try." The silence that followed my announcement was so complete, I could hear the kitchen exhaust fan humming in the background. My family stared at the business plan folder like it contained classified government documents rather than months of market research, financial projections, and strategic analysis. The disconnect between their shocked expressions and my growing excitement felt like standing on opposite sides of a cultural canyon that had been widening for years. Danny was the first to break the silence, his laugh sharp and dismissive. "You're going to start your own company? Jessica, you just got fired for not being able to work with other people. How exactly do you think running a business is going to be easier?" His question revealed the fundamental misunderstanding that had been festering between us since I graduated college. In Danny's world, shaped by restaurant operations where success meant executing established recipes and maintaining consistent service, business ownership was about perfecting existing systems rather than creating new ones. The idea that someone might start a company specifically to do things differently rather than simply to be their own boss was outside his experience. "Running a business isn't about working with other people," I replied, opening the folder to reveal pages of research and planning that represented 6 months of careful preparation. "It's about solving problems that other people can't or won't solve." Sophia leaned forward to examine the documents, her lawyer's training evident in how she immediately focused on the financial projections and legal structure I had outlined. Her expression shifted from skeptical amusement to serious concern as she realized this wasn't an impulsive reaction to getting fired, but a comprehensive plan I had been developing long before my confrontation with Marcus. "Jessica, do you have any idea how many marketing agencies fail in their first year?" she asked, her tone shifting from condescending to genuinely worried. "The overhead costs alone would eat through your savings in months. Office space, equipment, insurance, employee salaries if you're lucky enough to hire anyone. And that's assuming you can actually find clients willing to trust a brand new agency with no track record." Her concerns were valid, grounded in the kind of risk assessment that had made her successful in corporate law. Sophia's career had been built on careful analysis of potential liabilities and systematic mitigation of foreseeable problems. From her perspective, entrepreneurship looked like a reckless gamble with odds heavily stacked against success. But what Sophia didn't understand was that I had spent 3 years identifying exactly why agencies like Thompson Digital Solutions were failing, and more importantly, what kind of agency could succeed in the current market. The business plan she was examining wasn't based on wishful thinking or naive optimism. It was built on documented gaps in the industry and proven strategies that established agencies were too rigid to implement. "Most marketing agencies fail," I agreed, "because they're trying to compete in a market that changed 5 years ago using strategies that worked 10 years ago. They're fighting over scraps of an old business model instead of building something that actually serves current client needs." My father had remained quiet during the exchange, but I could see him calculating numbers in his head the way he did when reviewing the restaurant's monthly expenses. Carlos Martinez understood business fundamentals better than any of his children, having built a successful restaurant from nothing through 2 decades of careful financial management and strategic growth. "What kind of startup costs are we talking about?" he asked, his question cutting through Sophia's theoretical concerns to focus on practical realities. "How much money do you need to get this thing off the ground?" I had anticipated this question, and spent considerable time researching modern business models that could minimize initial overhead while maximizing operational flexibility. The traditional agency model that Marcus used required expensive downtown office space, full-time employees, and significant upfront investment in equipment and infrastructure. But the digital nature of marketing work meant that much of those costs were unnecessary overhead, rather than essential business requirements. $12,000, I replied, watching their expressions carefully. That covers business registration, basic equipment, insurance, and 6 months of operating expenses while I build a client base. The number was simultaneously more and less than they had expected. For a family that measured restaurant improvements in hundreds of dollars and considered $1,000 purchases major financial decisions, $12,000 represented a substantial investment. But for anyone familiar with traditional business, startup costs, especially in professional services, it was remarkably modest. $12,000? Rosa repeated, her voice carrying the mixture of relief and concern that characterized most of her reactions to her children's financial decisions. Where are you planning to get $12,000, Mija? The question I had been dreading finally arrived, carrying with it all the implications of family financial dynamics and expectations about supporting adult children through career transitions. I had been saving money for 2 years, building an emergency fund that was supposed to provide security during unexpected job transitions or economic downturns. Using that money to start a business instead of finding another stable job would represent a fundamental shift in my approach to financial planning. I have $8,000 in savings, I admitted, knowing that this revelation would trigger another round of family concern about my financial responsibility. I need to find $4,000 more, probably through a small business loan or investor. Danny's expression shifted from dismissive to incredulous. You're going to risk your entire emergency fund on this? What happens if it doesn't work? What happens if you can't find clients or if your first project fails? You'll have nothing left. His concern was genuine, rooted in the kind of financial anxiety that came from growing up in a family where money was always tight and unexpected expenses could trigger serious hardship. For Danny, who had never earned more than $35,000 in a year and whose financial security was entirely dependent on the restaurant's success, the idea of voluntarily risking $8,000 seemed incomprehensibly reckless. But Danny's perspective, while understandable, missed the crucial difference between risk and recklessness. I had spent months analyzing the market opportunity, studying successful agency models, and developing strategies specifically designed to minimize financial exposure while maximizing growth potential. The business plan he was dismissing represented more research and strategic thinking than most people applied to major life decisions. If it doesn't work, I said, meeting his gaze directly, I'll have learned more about business, marketing, and entrepreneurship than I ever could working for someone else. And I'll have experience that makes me more valuable to any future employer. Sophia closed the business plan folder and leaned back in her chair, her expression reflecting the kind of measured consideration she brought to complex legal cases. When she spoke again, her tone had shifted from protective concern to professional analysis. The idea isn't terrible, she admitted reluctantly. The market research looks solid, and you've identified some genuine problems with how current agencies operate. But Jessica, there's a huge difference between recognizing problems and successfully solving them in a competitive marketplace. Her acknowledgement that my plan had merit felt like a significant victory, coming from someone whose professional success was built on identifying flaws in other people's strategies. Sophia's legal training made her naturally skeptical of business, plans, and financial projections, so her qualified approval carried more weight than enthusiastic support from someone less analytically rigorous. What kind of problems are you talking about? My father asked, genuinely curious about the business opportunities I had identified. Carlos had built his restaurant by recognizing underserved needs in the local dining market, so he understood the importance of finding gaps between what customers wanted and what existing businesses provided. I opened the folder to a section detailing the specific inefficiencies and missed opportunities I had observed during my time at Thompson Digital Solutions. The document outlined how traditional agencies were structured around billable hours, rather than results, how they relied on generic strategies rather than customized solutions, and how they consistently underestimated the importance of data analytics and performance measurement. Most agencies sell time instead of outcomes, I explained, warming to a topic I had been thinking about for months. They charge clients for hours worked rather than results achieved, which creates an incentive structure that rewards inefficiency. Clients pay more for longer projects, even when longer projects don't produce better results. The concept seemed to resonate with my father, whose restaurant success was built on the opposite approach. Carlos measured success by customer satisfaction and repeat business rather than by how many hours he spent preparing each meal. The idea of charging clients based on time invested rather than value delivered probably seemed as backwards to him as it had to me. "So what's your alternative?" Sophia asked, her lawyer's instinct for identifying practical implementation challenges evident in her tone. "How do you structure pricing around results when marketing outcomes can take months to measure and depend on factors outside your control?" Her question hit on one of the most complex aspects of my business model, the challenge that had kept me awake several nights as I worked through the financial and operational implications of performance-based pricing. Traditional hourly billing existed partly because it was simple and predictable, while results-based pricing required more sophisticated measurement systems and greater tolerance for variable income. "Hybrid pricing," I replied, turning to another section of the business plan. "Base fees that cover essential services, plus performance bonuses tied to specific, measurable outcomes. Clients pay less upfront, but agencies earn more when campaigns actually work." The model I had developed was inspired by successful agencies in other markets who had already solved this problem, combined with my own analysis of what metrics actually mattered to small and medium-sized businesses. Instead of charging premium rates for generic services, I planned to offer competitive base pricing with significant upside potential tied to concrete results like increased web traffic, higher conversion rates, and improved customer acquisition costs. Danny had been listening to our conversation with growing skepticism, his expression suggesting that our discussion of pricing models and performance metrics sounded like elaborate rationalization for an inherently risky venture. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of practical experience working in a business where success was measured daily through customer satisfaction and revenue generation. "This all sounds very theoretical," he said, his tone respectful, but unconvinced. "But Jessica, running a business isn't about having good ideas. It's about executing those ideas consistently, day after day, while dealing with difficult customers, cash flow problems, equipment failures, and all the other stuff that can go wrong." His point was valid and reflected hard-earned wisdom from years of restaurant operations. Danny had seen firsthand how quickly unexpected problems could derail even well-planned business strategies. Equipment breakdowns, supplier issues, staffing, challenges, and economic downturns were constant threats that required adaptability and resilience, rather than just innovative thinking. "You're right," I acknowledged, appreciating his perspective even as I disagreed with his conclusions. "Execution is everything. But Danny, I've been executing other people's mediocre strategies for 3 years. I know what works and what doesn't, because I've been implementing campaigns and measuring results the entire time." My experience at Thompson Digital Solutions, while frustrating, had provided invaluable practical knowledge about client management, project coordination, and campaign implementation that most entrepreneurs lacked when starting their own agencies. I had worked directly with dozens of clients across various industries, learning their specific challenges and measuring the effectiveness of different approaches to digital marketing. More importantly, I had spent months documenting the gap between what clients actually needed and what agencies typically delivered. The business plan contained detailed case studies of campaigns that had failed despite significant time and budget investments, along with analysis of why those failures occurred and how different approaches might have produced better results. Rosa had been quiet during our discussion, but her expression reflected the internal struggle between maternal worry and maternal pride that had characterized her response to all her children's major life decisions. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the mixture of love and fear that defined so much of her parenting. "Mija, I just want you to be careful," she said, reaching across the table to touch my hand. "You're so smart and you work so hard, but business is risky. What if you lose everything? What if clients don't pay you? What if the economy gets bad?" Her concerns reflected decades of experience with the financial uncertainty that came with small business ownership. Rosa had watched her husband struggle through economic downturns, difficult months when restaurant revenue barely covered expenses, and the constant stress of depending on customer satisfaction for family financial security. The idea of her daughter voluntarily choosing that level of uncertainty, especially after having a stable corporate job, triggered all her protective instincts. "Mom, I've watched Dad build something incredible with this restaurant," I replied, gesturing around the dining room where family photos and customer testimonials told the story of 2 decades of gradual success. "He took risks, invested money he couldn't afford to lose, and worked 18-hour days to create something that supports our entire family. I want to build something like that in my own industry." The comparison seemed to surprise my father, whose expression shifted from skeptical caution to thoughtful consideration. Carlos had always been proud of what he had accomplished with the restaurant, but he rarely discussed the entrepreneurial aspects of his success with his children. Our conversations about the business typically focused on operational details, rather than strategic vision or risk management. "Running a restaurant is different," he said slowly, as if thinking through the comparison for the first time. "People need to eat every day. Food is essential. Marketing services." He paused, searching for the right words. "Marketing seems more like luxury that businesses cut when money gets tight." His observation touched on a fundamental challenge in the professional services industry, the cyclical nature of demand that made agencies vulnerable during economic downturns. When businesses faced financial pressure, marketing budgets were often among the first expenses to be reduced or eliminated entirely. Building a sustainable agency required developing services that clients viewed as essential rather than optional. "That's exactly why most agencies fail," I agreed. "They provide services that clients see as nice to have rather than must have. But businesses that stop marketing during tough times are the ones that struggle most to recover when conditions improve." I opened the business plan to a section analyzing recession-resistant marketing strategies and client retention approaches that could maintain revenue stability even during economic uncertainty. The research showed that agencies focusing on performance measurement and direct ROI typically maintained higher client retention rates because their value proposition remained clear even when budgets were tight. Sophia had been reviewing the financial projections while we talked, her legal training evident in how she analyzed the assumptions underlying my revenue and expense estimates. When she looked up from the documents, her expression reflected professional respect mixed with personal concern. "Your numbers look realistic," she admitted, her tone suggesting that this surprised her. "The market analysis is thorough, the competitive research is solid, and your financial projections are conservative enough to be believable. But Jessica, realistic projections don't guarantee real-world success." Her acknowledgement felt significant, because Sophia's professional success was built on evaluating complex proposals and identifying potential problems before they became actual disasters. If my business plan could pass her analytical scrutiny, it was probably robust enough to withstand the kind of challenges that destroyed poorly planned startups. "What concerns you most?" I asked, genuinely curious about her professional assessment of the risks I might be overlooking or underestimating. "Client acquisition," she replied immediately. Everything else in your plan depends on your ability to find clients willing to hire an unknown agency with no track record. Why would businesses choose you over established competitors with proven results and industry relationships? Her question identified the central challenge facing any new professional services business: the chicken and egg problem of needing experience to get clients while needing clients to get experience. Established agencies had decades of case studies, industry relationships, and marketing budgets that made them formidable competitors for any new entrant. But I had been thinking about this challenge for months, developing strategies specifically designed to overcome the credibility gap that destroyed most new agencies before they could establish themselves in the market. The solution wasn't to compete directly with established players on their terms, but to identify underserved market segments where innovation mattered more than reputation. I'm not going to compete with established agencies for Fortune 500 clients, I explained, turning to another section of the business plan. I'm targeting small and medium-sized businesses that are underserved by traditional agencies because their budgets are too small and their needs are too specialized. The market segment I had identified included restaurants, retail stores, professional services, and other local businesses that needed sophisticated digital marketing but couldn't afford the minimum budgets required by larger agencies. These businesses were currently served by freelancers with limited capabilities or large agencies that treated them as low-priority accounts. Restaurants like this one, I continued, looking directly at my father. Businesses that need modern marketing strategies but can't afford to pay premium rates for generic services designed for companies 10 times their size. The example seemed to land with unexpected impact. Carlos had struggled for years with marketing decisions, knowing that the restaurant needed better online presence and customer acquisition strategies, but unable to afford the kind of professional marketing services that larger businesses used routinely. His advertising efforts were limited to social media posts, local newspaper ads, and word-of-mouth referrals. "You think restaurants need marketing agencies?" he asked, his tone shifting from skeptical to genuinely curious. "Most of our customers find us through recommendations or they see us when they drive by." "Dad, how many potential customers drive by without stopping because they don't know what kind of food you serve or what makes this place special?" I asked. "How many people search online for Mexican restaurants in Austin and can't find you? Because your website is 10 years old and doesn't show up in search results?" The questions touched on frustrations that had been building for years as Carlos watched newer restaurants leverage social media and online marketing to build customer bases quickly while his established business relied primarily on traditional methods that were becoming less effective each year. "We've talked about updating the website," Rosa interjected, "but the quotes we got were so expensive, and we weren't sure it would actually bring in enough new customers to justify the cost." Her comment illustrated perfectly the problem I was hoping to solve: the gap between what small businesses needed and what traditional agencies could profitably provide. Most agencies focused on large projects with substantial budgets because their overhead costs and profit expectations made smaller clients financially unviable. "That's exactly the problem," I said, excitement building as I explained how my business model could serve clients that traditional agencies ignored. Most agencies can't afford to work with restaurants because their overhead is too high and their services are too generic. They need to charge thousands of dollars for websites and marketing campaigns to make their business model work. Danny had been listening to our conversation with growing interest, his skepticism gradually giving way to curiosity about how marketing strategies might actually benefit the family business. As someone who dealt with customers daily, he understood the challenges of attracting new diners while maintaining satisfaction among regular customers. "So what would you charge for something like updating our website and improving our online presence?" he asked, his question carrying practical implications for both the restaurant's marketing needs and my agency's potential viability. The question created an opportunity to demonstrate how my business model could work in practice while potentially solving a problem that had been frustrating my family for years. If I could successfully help the restaurant improve its marketing, while proving the viability of my approach, it would address both their skepticism about my business plan and their concerns about the restaurant's competitive position. For a restaurant like this, I said, opening my laptop to show them examples of successful restaurant marketing campaigns I had studied, I would charge $1,500 for a complete website redesign, search engine optimization, and social media strategy. Traditional agencies would charge $5,000 to $10,000 for the same services. The price differential seemed to surprise everyone, including Sophia, whose legal work involved reviewing marketing budgets for corporate clients. She knew that established agencies charged premium rates for services that often delivered questionable results, but she hadn't realized how dramatically those rates exceeded the actual value provided to clients. "How can you charge so much less?" she asked, her analytical mind immediately focusing on the economics of professional services pricing. "What are traditional agencies charging for that you're not including?" "Expensive downtown office space, large administrative staffs, and profit margins that prioritize shareholder returns over client results," I replied, warming to a topic I had researched extensively. Most of what clients pay for has nothing to do with the actual marketing services they receive. My business model was designed around the principle that digital marketing work could be performed effectively from anywhere with reliable internet access, eliminating the need for expensive office space and reducing overhead costs dramatically. By focusing on measurable results rather than billable hours, I could offer competitive pricing while maintaining healthy profit margins. The conversation continued for another hour as my family gradually shifted from skeptical dismissal to cautious interest in my business plan. By the time we finished reviewing the documents, the late afternoon sun was streaming through the restaurant windows, casting long shadows across tables that would soon be filled with dinner customers. As I gathered my materials to leave, my father stopped me with a question that would change everything about how I approached the next phase of my entrepreneurial journey. "Jessica," he said, his voice carrying the weight of 2 decades of business experience. "If you really think you can help restaurants with their marketing, why don't you start with us? Show us what you can do before you try to convince strangers to trust you with their money." My father's words hung in the restaurant air like the aroma of his famous mole sauce, rich with possibility and complex in their implications. The offer to use Martinez Family Restaurant as my first client was simultaneously the opportunity I needed and the challenge I feared most. Success would validate my entire business concept in front of the people whose opinions mattered most. Failure would confirm every doubt they had ever harbored about my professional judgment. "You want me to handle the restaurant's marketing?" I asked, needing clarification about what exactly he was proposing. "Like, officially? As a real client with a real budget and real expectations?" Carlos nodded slowly, his expression reflecting the careful consideration he brought to all major business decisions. "We've needed help with our online presence for years, but we've never found someone who understood both the business side and the restaurant industry. You know this place better than any outside agency ever could." His logic was sound, but it carried emotional weight that no traditional client relationship would involve. Working with the family restaurant meant that every strategic decision, every creative choice, and every measurable result would be scrutinized not just as professional work, but as evidence of my overall competence and family loyalty. The pressure felt enormous and oddly liberating at the same time. Danny had been quiet during the exchange, but his expression suggested he was processing the implications of having his sister as the restaurant's marketing consultant. The dynamic between us had always been complicated by our different approaches to family business and professional growth. Now those differences would be tested through actual collaboration rather than theoretical disagreement. "What kind of budget are we talking about?" he asked, his question addressing the practical reality that had made professional marketing seem impossibly expensive in the past. Because we've looked into this before, and the numbers never made sense for a business our size. The budget question was crucial because it would determine whether this project could serve as a meaningful proof of concept for my business model. If the restaurant could only afford a token investment, the results wouldn't demonstrate my ability to deliver significant value for clients. But if they invested at a level that reflected serious commitment, the pressure to deliver measurable results would be intense. $1,500, I said, quoting the same figure I had mentioned earlier. That covers website redesign, search engine optimization, social media strategy, and 3 months of campaign management. After that, we evaluate results and decide whether to continue with ongoing services. Sophia had been calculating something on her phone while we discussed logistics. When she looked up, her expression reflected both professional curiosity and personal concern about the family dynamics this arrangement might create. That's actually reasonable, she admitted, her tone suggesting this surprised her. But Jessica, what happens if the marketing doesn't work? What happens if 3 months from now the restaurant hasn't seen any increase in customers or revenue? How does that affect your relationship with the family versus your credibility as a business owner? Her question identified the inherent conflict between family relationships and professional accountability that could make this arrangement either perfect or disastrous. Traditional client relationships included clear boundaries between personal and professional consequences. Working with family meant that business disappointments could become personal conflicts that lasted long after any contract ended. If the marketing doesn't work, I replied, meeting her gaze directly, then I'll refund the money and find a different approach to building my client base. But Sophia, I've been studying this restaurant's marketing challenges for years. I know exactly what needs to be fixed and how to fix it. My confidence wasn't based on naive optimism or family loyalty. During college, I had written several marketing analysis papers using the restaurant as a case study, examining everything from its online presence to its customer acquisition strategies. I understood the business's strengths and weaknesses better than any external consultant ever could. Rosa had remained characteristically quiet during our business discussion, but her expression reflected the mixture of pride and worry that accompanied all her children's major endeavors. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the weight of maternal wisdom earned through decades of supporting family dreams while managing practical concerns. "Mia, I think it's a good idea," she said, surprising everyone with her directness. "But you have to promise me something. If this doesn't work out, if there are problems between you and your father or Danny about the business, we don't let it hurt our family. Business is business, but family is forever." Her condition revealed the emotional intelligence that had held our family together through various crises and transitions over the years. Rosa understood that mixing family relationships with business arrangements required careful attention to boundaries and explicit agreements about how to handle conflicts that might arise. "I promise, Mom," I said, appreciating her wisdom even as I felt confident that professional success would strengthen rather than strain our family relationships. "This is going to work. I'm going to show all of you what this restaurant could become with the right marketing strategy." The commitment felt both thrilling and terrifying as I spoke it aloud. For months, I had been developing theories about digital marketing and business strategy without the pressure of real-world application. Now I would have to prove that my ideas could generate measurable results for a business whose success directly affected people I loved. Carlos extended his hand across the table, his gesture formal despite our family relationship. "Okay, Jessica, you have 3 months to show us what you can do, but we do this professionally, with contracts and deadlines, and regular progress reports. If you want to be a business owner, you need to act like one." His handshake carried the weight of genuine respect, along with clear expectations about professional conduct. Carlos had built his restaurant success through disciplined attention to quality, consistency, and customer satisfaction. He was offering me the same standards and accountability that he applied to every other aspect of his business operations. The following morning, I woke up before dawn with the kind of nervous energy that accompanies the first day of any major endeavor. My laptop sat on the kitchen table, surrounded by notebooks, market research, and a business plan that now had its first real-world test. The transition from theoretical entrepreneur to actual business owner felt sudden and overwhelming. I spent the early hours reviewing everything I knew about the restaurant's current marketing situation. Their website had been built in 2015 and looked like it had been designed 5 years before that. The photography was amateur, the menu information was outdated, and the site didn't appear in the first 3 pages of search results for relevant keywords. Their social media presence consisted of sporadic Facebook posts and an Instagram account with fewer than 200 followers. But beneath these obvious problems lay a business with genuine strengths that professional marketing could amplify dramatically. The restaurant had 20 years of customer loyalty, consistently high food quality, and a location that could attract significantly more foot traffic with better visibility. Carlos had built something authentic and sustainable that just needed contemporary marketing to reach its full potential. My first official act as a business owner was opening a business checking account at the credit union where I had banked since college. The process felt simultaneously mundane and momentous, a bureaucratic milestone that marked the transition from employee to entrepreneur. Filling out forms that asked for business purpose and anticipated revenue made my venture feel real in a way that months of planning never had. The bank officer who processed my application was a woman in her 40s named Patricia, who had apparently helped several local entrepreneurs establish their businesses. When she learned that I was starting a marketing agency, her expression shifted to professional interest mixed with gentle skepticism. "Marketing is competitive," she observed while reviewing my paperwork. "What makes you think you can succeed where so many others have struggled?" Her question was direct but not unfriendly, reflecting the kind of practical curiosity that small business owners developed about each other's ventures. Patricia had probably seen dozens of marketing consultants open accounts with similar hopes and varying degrees of success. "I'm focusing on clients that traditional agencies ignore," I explained, appreciating her straightforward approach to business discussion. "Small businesses that need professional marketing but can't afford premium agency rates." "Like restaurants?" she asked, her tone suggesting personal experience with the challenges facing local food service businesses. "My husband and I have talked about better marketing for years, but every proposal we've gotten was either too expensive or too generic to be worth the investment." The conversation provided unexpected validation for my business concept. If Patricia and her husband, presumably financially sophisticated due to her banking background, had encountered the same problems that frustrated my family, then the market opportunity was probably larger than my research had indicated. "Exactly like restaurants," I confirmed, handing her my business card fresh from the printer. "I'm actually starting with my family's restaurant to prove the concept before approaching other clients." Patricia's expression shifted to genuine interest as she examined the card. "Smart approach. Nothing builds credibility like demonstrated results with real businesses. What's your family's restaurant?" When I told her about Martinez family restaurant, her face lit up with recognition. "I love that place. We go there at least once a month. The food is incredible, but you're right about the marketing. I only found out about it because a coworker recommended it, and I've been telling friends about it for years." Her reaction confirmed what I had suspected about the restaurant's untapped potential. Carlos had built something special that generated passionate customer loyalty, but that loyalty wasn't translating into broader market awareness because potential customers couldn't find information about the restaurant when they searched for dining options. The drive back to East Austin took me through downtown, where construction cranes and new high-rises reflected the city's explosive growth over the past decade. Austin's transformation from quirky college town to major tech hub had created opportunities and challenges for established local businesses like the restaurant. New residents brought increased demand for dining options, but they also brought competition from chain restaurants and venture-funded startups with sophisticated marketing budgets. I spent the afternoon at the restaurant during the slow period, between lunch and dinner, taking detailed photographs of the food, the interior, and the kitchen operations. Professional food photography was expensive, but my marketing background included enough design experience to create compelling visual content with careful attention to lighting and composition. Danny watched my impromptu photo shoot with mixture of curiosity and amusement. "This feels weird," he admitted as I arranged plates for optimal visual impact. Having my sister document everything like we're some kind of social media experiment. His discomfort reflected the cultural tension between traditional restaurant operations and contemporary marketing requirements. For 20 years, the restaurant's success had been measured by the satisfaction of customers who were physically present, eating food prepared with care and served with genuine hospitality. The idea of translating that experience into digital content felt artificial and potentially exploitative. "It's not an experiment," I assured him while adjusting camera angles to capture the texture of his perfectly prepared carnitas. "It's documentation. People need to see what makes this place special before they decide to visit. These photos will show them exactly what they can expect." The distinction was important because it addressed his underlying concern about authenticity. I wasn't trying to create misleading marketing that oversold the restaurant's offerings or misrepresented the dining experience. The goal was to communicate honestly and compellingly about what the restaurant actually provided to its customers. As the afternoon progressed, I began to understand the rhythm of the restaurant's operations in ways I had never appreciated as a family member. The careful timing of food preparation, the intricate dance of kitchen coordination, the attention to detail that made each plate both visually appealing and delicious. These were the elements that needed to be communicated through marketing, not just the basic information about hours and menu items. My mother spent part of the afternoon sharing stories about regular customers, their favorite dishes, and the personal connections that made the restaurant feel like an extension of our family. These stories would become the foundation for social media content that emphasized community connection rather than just food quality. "Mrs. Rodriguez has been coming here every Friday for 15 years, Rosa explained while I took notes about customer relationships. "She always orders the same thing, but she stays for an hour talking with other customers. This place is part of her social life, not just where she eats dinner." The insight revealed an important aspect of the restaurant's value proposition that had never been articulated in marketing materials. Martinez Family Restaurant wasn't just a place to consume food. It was a community gathering space where relationships were built and maintained over shared meals. That social dimension could be leveraged through marketing strategies that emphasized connection and belonging rather than just convenience and taste. By evening, I had gathered enough content to begin building a comprehensive digital presence that would accurately represent what made the restaurant special. The website redesign would showcase the food quality, communicate the family history, and make essential information easily accessible to potential customers. Social media content would tell ongoing stories about the community connections that made the restaurant feel like home to its regular customers. But the real challenge would be measuring results in ways that demonstrated clear return on investment. Carlos had agreed to this arrangement because he understood that the restaurant needed better marketing, but he would evaluate success based on concrete outcomes like increased foot traffic, higher average ticket sales, and improved customer acquisition costs. I spent that evening creating detailed analytics systems that would track every aspect of the marketing campaign's performance: website traffic, social media engagement, online review generation, phone inquiries, and most importantly, the correlation between marketing activities and actual restaurant revenue. The data would tell a story about whether professional marketing could generate measurable value for small businesses like the family restaurant. The work felt different from anything I had done at Thompson Digital Solutions. Instead of implementing someone else's mediocre strategies for clients I barely understood, I was developing comprehensive solutions for a business whose success mattered personally. The pressure was intense, but so was the motivation to exceed expectations and prove that my approach to marketing could deliver results that justified the investment. 3 days into the project, I had completed the website redesign and begun implementing the social media strategy. The new site featured professional quality photography, streamlined navigation, and optimized content that would improve search engine rankings significantly. Social media accounts were refreshed with consistent branding and content that told the story of the restaurant's history, community connections, and commitment to authentic Mexican cuisine. The initial response from existing customers was overwhelmingly positive. Online reviews mentioned the improved website, social media followers began increasing steadily, and phone inquiries about catering and private events started arriving more frequently. But the real test would be whether these digital improvements translated into increased revenue over the coming weeks. Sophia stopped by the restaurant during lunch to see the marketing campaign in action. She spent several minutes reviewing the new website on her phone, her legal training evident in how she analyzed the professional presentation and clear information architecture. "This looks completely different," she said, genuine surprise in her voice. "It actually looks like a professional restaurant instead of a family hobby that happens to serve food." Her observation touched on an important aspect of small business marketing that I had been thinking about throughout the project. Many excellent local businesses suffered from marketing that made them appear less competent or established than they actually were. The gap between their actual quality and their perceived quality was often just a matter of professional presentation. "That's exactly the problem I'm trying to solve," I explained while showing her the analytics dashboard that would track the campaign's performance. "Great businesses that look amateur online and amateur businesses that look great online. The goal is to make sure that quality businesses can present themselves professionally." Danny had been observing our conversation while managing lunch service, and his expression suggested that he was beginning to understand the potential impact of professional marketing on the restaurant's success. When he joined us at the end of the lunch rush, his tone was more serious than skeptical. "I've had 3 people today mention the new website," he reported, his voice carrying a mixture of surprise and excitement. "One guy said he found us through a Google search for Mexican restaurants, which hasn't happened in years. And 2 customers asked about catering because they saw the information on the website. The early results were encouraging, but I knew that sustainable success would require consistent performance over months rather than initial enthusiasm that might fade quickly. The real test of my business model would be whether the marketing campaign could generate enough additional revenue to justify the investment while providing a foundation for long-term growth. As the first week concluded, I felt cautiously optimistic about both the restaurant's marketing campaign and my own transition to entrepreneurship. The work was challenging and the pressure was intense, but the freedom to implement comprehensive strategies without bureaucratic interference was intoxicating after 3 years of corporate frustration. More importantly, I was beginning to understand how my experience with family business operations could become a competitive advantage in serving other small business clients. The insight into operational challenges, customer relationships, and financial pressures that came from growing up in an entrepreneurial family provided context that pure marketing knowledge couldn't replicate. The phone call that would change everything came on Friday afternoon while I was updating social media content in the restaurant's back office. Marcus Thompson's name appeared on my caller ID, triggering a mixture of curiosity and dread about why my former boss would be contacting me a week after terminating my employment. "Jessica," his voice carried an unfamiliar tone that I eventually recognized as professional desperation masked as casual friendliness. "I hope you're doing well. I wanted to talk with you about a business opportunity that might interest you." The irony of Marcus Thompson offering me business opportunities after firing me for proposing business improvements was not lost on me, but his timing couldn't have been better for testing my new position of entrepreneurial independence. "Marcus," Thompson's voice carried the forced casualness of someone trying to disguise desperation as opportunity. After 3 years of working under his management, I recognized the subtle tension that crept into his tone when Thompson Digital Solutions faced client crises or competitive threats. Whatever had prompted this call was serious enough to overcome his wounded pride about firing me. "I'm doing very well, actually," I replied, keeping my voice professionally neutral while my mind raced through possible reasons for his contact. "What kind of business opportunity did you have in mind?" The pause that followed was longer than normal conversation flow would dictate, filled with the kind of silence that suggested Marcus was carefully choosing his words. When he finally spoke, his voice had lost some of its artificial confidence. "We've encountered some challenges with a major client account," he said, the corporate euphemism failing to mask what sounded like a significant crisis. "The client is threatening to terminate their contract unless we can demonstrate improved performance within the next 2 weeks. I remembered your suggestions about modernizing our approach, and I thought perhaps we could discuss bringing you back as a consultant to help resolve the situation." The irony was breathtaking. Marcus Thompson, who had fired me for proposing exactly the kind of modernization he now desperately needed, was asking me to return as an outside consultant to implement the strategies he had rejected when I was his employee. The professional vindication felt satisfying, but the business opportunity felt even more compelling. "Which client are we talking about?" I asked, genuinely curious about what kind of crisis could drive Marcus to swallow his pride and contact someone he had recently terminated for insubordination. "Austin Tech Innovations," he replied, naming one of the fastest-growing technology companies in the city. "They've been our largest client for 18 months, but their new marketing director is questioning the effectiveness of our campaigns. She's demanding detailed performance analytics and return on investment calculations that our current systems can't provide." Austin Tech Innovations was exactly the kind of client that had made Thompson Digital Solutions profitable despite its operational inefficiencies. Their monthly retainer was probably worth more than most agencies earned from multiple smaller clients combined. Losing that account would create a financial crisis that could threaten the agency's survival. More importantly, the client's demands for performance analytics and ROI calculations were precisely the capabilities I had been trying to convince Marcus to develop for years. The situation was a perfect case study in how avoiding necessary improvements could create existential threats to business sustainability. "What specifically are they looking for?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. "Technology." Companies typically evaluated marketing investments with the same analytical rigor they applied to product development and operational decisions. Detailed tracking of lead generation, conversion rates, customer acquisition costs, and long-term revenue attribution, Marcus recited, his tone suggesting these concepts were foreign territory that made him deeply uncomfortable. "They want to see exactly how their marketing budget translates into measurable business outcomes." The requirements he described were standard expectations for any sophisticated client, but Thompson Digital Solutions had always operated on the assumption that clients would trust professional expertise without demanding detailed accountability. Marcus had built his business model around selling time and creative concepts rather than measurable results. "Those are reasonable expectations," I observed, allowing a hint of the professional judgment he had once dismissed to color my response. "Most technology companies evaluate all their vendors based on quantifiable performance metrics." "Right, absolutely," Marcus agreed quickly, his eagerness to seem knowledgeable about concepts he had never prioritized revealing just how precarious his situation had become. "The challenge is that our current reporting systems weren't designed to provide that level of analytical depth." His admission confirmed what I had suspected during my employment. Thompson Digital Solutions had been coasting on outdated systems and superficial client relationships that were increasingly vulnerable to competitive pressure from more sophisticated agencies. The reckoning I had predicted was finally arriving. "What kind of consulting arrangement were you thinking about?" I asked, curious whether Marcus understood that hiring me as an independent contractor would cost significantly more than the salary he had been paying me as an employee. "We were hoping you could come in for a few days, maybe a week, to help us set up the analytics systems and prepare the presentation for Austin Tech Innovations," he explained, his request revealing a fundamental misunderstanding of both the scope of work required and my current professional situation. The consulting project he was describing would require weeks rather than days to implement properly, and the value it would create for his agency was worth far more than the temporary assistance fee he probably had in mind. More importantly, I was no longer an unemployed marketing coordinator desperate for income. I was an independent business owner with my own clients and strategic priorities. "Marcus, what you're describing isn't a few days of consulting work," I replied, allowing my professional expertise to inform my response rather than any lingering emotional connection to my former employer. Implementing comprehensive analytics systems and developing performance-based reporting requires fundamental changes to how campaigns are structured and managed. The silence that followed suggested Marcus was beginning to understand that his problems were more complex and expensive to solve than he had hoped. Thompson Digital Solutions had spent years avoiding the investments in technology and methodology that would have prevented this crisis. Now those deferred improvements would need to be implemented under extreme time pressure with a critical client relationship hanging in the balance. "What would be involved exactly?" he asked, his tone shifting from casual inquiry to serious business discussion. I found myself in the unexpected position of educating my former boss about the requirements for modernizing the agency he had been too proud to improve when I worked there. The conversation felt surreal, but it also represented a perfect opportunity to demonstrate the value of the business approach that had cost me my job: complete campaign restructuring to enable detailed performance tracking, implementation of advanced analytics tools, training for account managers on data interpretation and client reporting, and development of dashboard systems that provide real-time visibility into campaign effectiveness, I explained, outlining the scope of work that would be required to meet Austin Tech Innovations' expectations. Marcus remained quiet while I spoke, presumably calculating the cost and complexity of the improvements he had spent 3 years avoiding. When he finally responded, his voice carried the weight of someone facing uncomfortable financial realities. "How much would something like that cost?" he asked, the question revealing just how desperate his situation had become. The consulting fee I quoted was 3 times my former annual salary, reflecting both the specialized nature of the work and the urgent timeline he was requesting. The number seemed to shock Marcus into another extended silence, during which I could almost hear him weighing the cost of hiring me against the cost of losing his largest client. "That's significantly more than we were anticipating," he admitted, his diplomatic phrasing unable to disguise his sticker shock at the price of the expertise he had recently dismissed as expendable. "Marcus, Austin Tech Innovations probably pays you more in 2 months than my entire consulting fee," I replied, stating the obvious financial mathematics that made his hesitation seem short-sighted. "If you lose that client because you won't invest in the capabilities they require, you'll spend years trying to replace that revenue." The conversation was becoming a business education session about the real economics of professional services, topics that Marcus had apparently never considered during his years of agency ownership. His focus on minimizing costs rather than maximizing value had created the crisis he now faced. "I need to discuss this with my business partner," he said, referring to the silent partner who provided financial backing for Thompson Digital Solutions, but rarely involved himself in operational decisions. "Can I call you back tomorrow?" "Of course," I replied, though I suspected that 24 hours of consideration would only reinforce how expensive his years of strategic avoidance had become. "But Marcus, I should mention that my availability is limited. I have other clients now, and this project would require a significant time commitment." The reminder that I was no longer available at his convenience seemed to surprise him, as if he had assumed that unemployment would make me eager to accept any opportunity to return to Thompson Digital Solutions. The reality that I had already moved on to independent consulting work apparently hadn't occurred to him. After the call ended, I sat in the restaurant's back office processing the implications of Marcus's unexpected offer. The consulting project would provide substantial revenue for my new business while validating the strategic expertise that had gotten me fired. More importantly, success with Austin Tech Innovations would create a case study that could attract similar high-value clients. But accepting the project would also mean temporarily setting aside the restaurant marketing campaign and other business development activities that were building momentum for my agency. The decision would test my ability to balance immediate financial opportunities against long-term strategic priorities. Danny appeared in the doorway as I was weighing these considerations, his expression curious about the phone conversation he had overheard. Since beginning the restaurant's marketing campaign, his attitude toward my business venture had shifted from skeptical dismissal to genuine interest in how professional marketing could impact small business success. "That sounded like an interesting conversation," he observed, settling into the chair across from my makeshift desk. "Was that a potential client?" "My former boss," I replied, still processing the surreal nature of Marcus's request. "The company that fired me last week wants to hire me as a consultant to solve problems they wouldn't let me fix when I worked there." Danny's expression shifted to amazement, then something approaching respect for the dramatic reversal of power dynamics that the call represented. During our years of disagreement about career strategies and professional priorities, he had consistently argued that challenging authority was counterproductive compared to accepting established systems. "So what are you going to do?" he asked, his question carrying genuine curiosity rather than the skeptical judgment that had characterized most of our previous conversations about my career decisions. "I'm going to charge them 3 times what they used to pay me," I replied, the certainty in my voice surprising even me. "And I'm going to fix their problems so well that their client becomes a reference for my own agency." The confidence I felt was based on more than vindictive satisfaction at Marcus's predicament. The consulting project represented an opportunity to demonstrate the value of modern marketing approaches while building credibility with exactly the kind of sophisticated client that could anchor my agency's growth. Rosa entered the office as Danny and I were discussing the implications of the consulting opportunity. Her timing was characteristic of the maternal intuition that allowed her to appear whenever important family conversations were taking place. "Mija, I heard you talking about your old job," she said, her expression reflecting the mixture of concern and curiosity that accompanied any development in her children's professional lives. "Are they trying to hire you back?" "Not exactly," I explained, summarizing Marcus's request and the ironic circumstances that had prompted his call. "They want to hire me to solve problems they created by ignoring my suggestions when I worked there." Rosa's reaction was immediate and emphatic. "Good. Now they'll pay you what you're worth instead of treating you like you don't know anything." Her response reflected years of frustration with how my expertise had been undervalued at Thompson Digital Solutions. The family's support for my decision to charge premium consulting rates was both gratifying and strategically important. If I was going to succeed as an independent business owner, I needed to internalize the confidence to price my services based on their value rather than my desperation for income. Carlos emerged from the kitchen during our discussion, drawn by the animated conversation about business opportunities and professional vindication. When Rosa explained the situation, his expression reflected the satisfaction of someone whose business instincts had been validated by external events. "This is why you start your own business," he observed, his tone carrying the weight of 20 years of entrepreneurial experience. "When you work for someone else, they control your value. When you work for yourself, you set your own price." His comment crystallized an important lesson about the psychological transition from employee to entrepreneur. As an employee, I had been constrained by salary ranges and promotion schedules determined by someone else's assessment of my worth. As an independent consultant, my value was limited only by my ability to deliver results that justified premium pricing. The restaurant's dinner service began while we were discussing the consulting opportunity, but the conversation continued between orders as family members processed the implications of Marcus's desperate request for help. The situation had transformed, from a potential setback to my business plans, into validation of the strategic expertise that formed the foundation of my new agency. Sophia arrived during the dinner rush, fresh from her law firm and curious about the family excitement she had detected in Danny's text messages. When she learned about Marcus's call, her expression shifted from surprise to professional analysis of the consulting opportunity. "What kind of contract are you planning to use?" she asked, her legal training immediately focusing on the risk management aspects of working with a former employer in crisis. "You need to protect yourself against liability issues if their client relationship deteriorates despite your efforts." Her concern was valid and reflected the kind of professional judgment that had made her successful in corporate law. Consulting relationships with desperate clients created potential for disputes about responsibility when problems proved more complex than initial assessments suggested. I was planning to use a standard consulting agreement with clear scope, limitations, and performance expectations, I replied, appreciating her legal perspective on what could become a complicated business relationship. "That's good, but you also need payment terms that protect your cash flow," Sophia continued, her analysis becoming more detailed as she considered potential complications. "Companies in crisis sometimes delay payment to consultants while prioritizing other creditors." The advice was particularly valuable because it came from someone whose professional experience included dealing with businesses facing financial pressure. Sophia had seen how quickly client relationships could deteriorate when companies struggled to manage multiple competing priorities. "Half the fee up front, half on completion?" I suggested, proposing payment terms that would minimize my financial exposure while demonstrating confidence in my ability to deliver results. "Better make it 2/3 up front," Sophia recommended. "If they're desperate enough to pay your rate, they can afford to show good faith with advance payment." The consultation felt like receiving strategic advice from a business partner rather than protective guidance from an older sibling. Sophia's professional respect for my expertise was evident in how she analyzed the consulting opportunity as a legitimate business transaction rather than a risky venture that required family protection. By the end of the evening, I had decided to accept Marcus's consulting offer with payment terms and contract provisions that reflected my new status as an independent business owner rather than a desperate job seeker. The project would provide substantial revenue while creating an opportunity to demonstrate the effectiveness of modern marketing approaches. More importantly, success with the Thompson Digital Solutions crisis would create a powerful case study for attracting similar clients who were struggling with outdated marketing strategies. The consulting project could become the foundation for building a sustainable business focused on helping established companies modernize their approach to digital marketing. The phone call from Marcus came the following afternoon as I was finishing social media updates for the restaurant. His voice carried the resigned acceptance of someone who had calculated his limited options and reached an uncomfortable conclusion about necessary investments. "We'd like to move forward with the consulting arrangement," he said without preamble, his directness suggesting that extended deliberation had only reinforced the urgency of his situation. "When could you start?" "Monday," I replied, having anticipated his decision and prepared accordingly. "But I'll need the advance payment and signed contract before I begin any work." The professional boundaries I was establishing felt foreign, after 3 years of employment where my time and expertise had been controlled by someone else's priorities. But the transition to independent consulting required clear expectations about payment, scope, and accountability that protected both parties. "Of course," Marcus agreed quickly, his eagerness to secure my services evident in how readily he accepted terms that would have seemed outrageous when he was my employer. "I'll have our business manager send over the payment and paperwork today." The speed of his agreement confirmed my suspicion that Thompson Digital Solutions was facing an existential crisis that made my consulting fee seem reasonable compared to the alternative of losing their largest client. The power dynamic between us had shifted completely in the span of a week. As I prepared for what would become the most challenging and rewarding project of my early entrepreneurial career, I reflected on how dramatically my professional situation had changed since the morning Marcus had handed me my termination papers. The skills and expertise he had dismissed as insubordinate were now valuable enough to command premium consulting rates. The irony was satisfying, but the real victory would come from proving that modern marketing approaches could solve problems that traditional methods couldn't address. Success with Austin Tech Innovations would validate not just my consulting skills, but the entire business philosophy that had gotten me fired and launched my entrepreneurial journey. The weekend passed quickly as I prepared comprehensive strategies for modernizing Thompson Digital Solutions' approach to client reporting and campaign management. The work felt familiar yet liberating, combining the technical expertise I had developed over 3 years with the creative freedom I had never experienced as an employee. Monday morning would mark my return to the Austin Tech Tower, but this time as an independent consultant rather than a terminated employee. The transformation felt symbolic of everything I hoped to achieve through entrepreneurship. The freedom to implement effective strategies without bureaucratic interference, the opportunity to be compensated fairly for expertise and results, and the satisfaction of building something valuable through professional competence rather than corporate politics. Walking into Thompson Digital Solutions as an independent consultant felt like returning to a different universe. The same exposed brick walls and industrial lighting that had once represented my professional limitations now served as the backdrop for demonstrating expertise that commanded premium rates. Marcus Thompson greeted me in the lobby with the careful deference typically reserved for expensive external advisors, a stark contrast to the dismissive authority he had wielded during my employment. "Jessica, thank you for making time for this project," he said, his handshake firmer than necessary, as if physical emphasis could disguise the awkwardness of our reversed positions. The Austin Tech Innovations meeting is scheduled for Friday, which gives us 4 days to implement the analytics systems they're demanding. 4 days to accomplish what should have been implemented gradually over months represented the kind of impossible deadline that desperate clients often imposed on consultants. But the urgency also meant that success would be immediately visible and failure equally apparent, creating perfect conditions for demonstrating the value of modern marketing approaches. The conference room where Marcus had once lectured me about company culture and proven methods now served as my temporary office, equipped with multiple monitors and direct access to all campaign data. The irony of using his own meeting space to implement strategies he had rejected was not lost on either of us, though professional courtesy prevented explicit acknowledgement of the role reversal. "Show me everything," I said, settling into the chair at the head of the table that Marcus had previously occupied during our contentious strategy meetings. Campaign structures, client communications, performance data, current reporting systems. I need to understand exactly what we're working with. The comprehensive audit I conducted over the following hours revealed problems even more severe than I had suspected during my employment. Thompson Digital Solutions had been operating with tracking systems that belonged in 2010, campaign structures that prevented meaningful performance analysis, and client reporting that relied more on creative presentation than actual data interpretation. Marcus hovered nervously during my assessment, occasionally offering explanations for why certain systems had never been updated or why particular metrics weren't being tracked. His rationalizations revealed the kind of institutional complacency that eventually destroys businesses unwilling to adapt to changing market requirements. Austin Tech Innovations has been asking for conversion tracking and customer lifetime value analysis for 6 months, I observed while reviewing their account history. Why wasn't this implemented when they first requested it? We kept hoping their priorities would shift back to the creative work we've always focused on, Marcus admitted, his answer revealing the wishful thinking that had guided his agency's strategic decisions. Data analytics seemed like a temporary trend that would eventually give way to more traditional marketing approaches. His explanation demonstrated a fundamental misunderstanding of how technology companies evaluate vendor relationships. Austin Tech Innovations hadn't requested detailed analytics as a negotiating tactic or temporary preference. They had asked for the kind of performance measurement that any sophisticated client expected from professional marketing services. The work of rebuilding their entire analytics infrastructure while maintaining ongoing campaign performance required 18-hour days and systematic attention to technical details that Marcus had never prioritized. But the challenge was exactly the kind of comprehensive problem-solving that made independent consulting intellectually satisfying compared to the incremental improvements possible within established corporate structures. By Wednesday evening, I had implemented tracking systems that provided real-time visibility into every aspect of Austin Tech Innovations' marketing performance. Lead generation, conversion rates, customer acquisition costs, and revenue attribution were now measured automatically and displayed through dashboard interfaces that could be updated continuously. Marcus reviewed the preliminary results with amazement bordering on disbelief. The analytics revealed campaign performance patterns that had been invisible under their previous reporting methods, including significant inefficiencies in budget, allocation, and untapped opportunities for optimization. I had no idea our social media campaigns were performing this poorly relative to search advertising, he said, while examining conversion data that showed dramatic differences in cost effectiveness across channels. If we had seen this information months ago, we could have reallocated budget to improve overall results. That's exactly why Austin Tech Innovations demanded better analytics, I replied, using his realization as a teaching moment about the strategic value of data-driven marketing decisions. They weren't questioning your expertise out of distrust. They needed information that would help them make smarter business decisions. The insight seemed to shift Marcus's understanding of client relationships from defensive protectiveness about professional judgment to collaborative problem-solving focused on measurable outcomes. The transformation was subtle but significant, reflecting how access to better information could change fundamental approaches to client service. Thursday morning brought the first concrete evidence that our efforts were generating results beyond improved reporting capabilities. Austin Tech Innovations' marketing director called to express enthusiasm about the preliminary analytics dashboard I had sent for her review. "This is exactly what we've been looking for," she told Marcus during a conference call that I monitored from my temporary office. "The level of detail and actionable insights are far superior to anything we've received from previous agencies. We'd like to extend our contract and discuss expanding the scope of work." The conversation that followed revealed the full extent of the opportunity that Marcus had nearly lost through his resistance to modernization. Austin Tech Innovations wasn't just satisfied with the improved analytics. They were impressed enough to consider Thompson Digital Solutions for additional projects that could double their monthly retainer. Marcus's expression during the call reflected simultaneous relief and recognition of how close he had come to losing his most valuable client through strategic stubbornness. The crisis that had driven him to seek my consulting services had transformed into an opportunity for significant business growth. "Jessica, I owe you an apology," he said after the call ended, his tone carrying genuine humility that I had never heard during my employment. "You were right about everything. The analytics, the performance tracking, the need to modernize our approach. I should have listened when you were trying to help the company improve." His admission was gratifying, but it also represented an opportunity to address the broader implications of what had happened between us. Marcus's resistance to innovation hadn't been personal animosity toward me specifically, but rather institutional, fear of changes that might threaten established business models. "Marcus, this isn't about being right or wrong," I replied, recognizing that professional magnanimity would serve my long-term interests better than vindictive satisfaction. It's about understanding that client needs evolve faster than agency, capabilities, and successful businesses adapt accordingly. The conversation might have continued along these philosophical lines, but it was interrupted by an urgent knock on the conference room door. Marcus's business partner, Richard Steinberg, entered with an expression that suggested serious concerns about something more significant than client relationship management. "Marcus, we need to talk privately," Richard said, his glance in my direction, making it clear that the conversation involved confidential business matters that shouldn't be discussed in front of consultants. I gathered my materials and stepped out to give them privacy, but the tone of their discussion was audible through the glass conference room walls. Richard's voice carried the kind of controlled urgency that accompanied major financial or legal problems, while Marcus's responses seemed defensive and increasingly desperate. The conversation lasted nearly an hour, ending with Richard's departure and Marcus's return to my temporary office looking like someone who had received devastating news. His expression combined shock, anger, and the kind of resignation that accompanies the collapse of long-held assumptions about business security. "Jessica, I need to ask you something, and I need a completely honest answer," he said, settling heavily into the chair across from my workspace. "Based on what you've seen this week, what do you think Thompson Digital Solutions is actually worth?" The question was unexpected and loaded with implications that I couldn't fully understand without knowing what had transpired during his private conversation with Richard. But the request for business valuation suggested that ownership changes were being considered, either voluntarily or under external pressure. "That depends on several factors," I replied carefully, recognizing that my answer could influence major business decisions. "Are we talking about the company as it exists now, or as it could exist with proper modernization?" "As it exists now," Marcus said, his specificity suggesting that immediate rather than potential value was the relevant consideration, with current clients, current systems, and current capabilities. The honest assessment he was requesting would not be flattering to a business that had spent years avoiding necessary improvements while depending on relationships and reputation to maintain profitability. Thompson Digital Solutions had assets and client relationships, but it also had structural weaknesses that made it vulnerable to competitive pressure. "Maybe $400,000, I said, after considering the company's client base, equipment, and market position. "The Austin Tech Innovations relationship is valuable, but most of your other clients could easily switch to competitors offering more sophisticated services." Marcus absorbed my assessment with the grim acceptance of someone whose worst fears were being confirmed by objective analysis. The number I had quoted was apparently consistent with whatever Richard had told him during their private discussion. "Richard wants to sell his stake in the company," Marcus explained, his voice reflecting the exhaustion of someone facing the collapse of professional dreams he had spent years building. "He's found a buyer who's willing to pay $600,000 for the entire business, but only if the sale happens within the next 2 weeks. The timeline he described was typically associated with distressed business sales, where external pressures forced rapid decisions that favored buyers over sellers. Richard's motivation to sell quickly suggested either financial problems or strategic opportunities that made immediate liquidity more valuable than long-term business ownership. "What does that mean for your ownership stake?" I asked, genuinely curious about how partnership dissolution would affect Marcus's financial situation and professional future. "I either buy out Richard's 50% interest for $300,000, or I lose control of the company I spent 8 years building," he replied, the stark mathematics of his situation evident in how simply he stated the alternatives. The sum he mentioned was substantial for someone whose business had been struggling with modernization challenges and client retention problems. Traditional small business lending would likely be difficult to secure given Thompson Digital Solutions' recent performance and uncertain competitive position. "Do you have access to that kind of capital?" I asked, though his expression already suggested that financing would be problematic. "Not readily," Marcus admitted, his answer confirming that he was facing the kind of financial crisis that destroyed business ownership dreams and forced experienced professionals back into employee roles with other companies. The conversation that followed revealed the full scope of the opportunity that was presenting itself to me. Marcus needed $300,000 within 2 weeks to retain control of Thompson Digital Solutions. I had been contemplating the acquisition of a small marketing agency as a growth strategy for my consulting business. The timing was extraordinary, but the potential was undeniable. Marcus, what if I bought Richard's stake instead of you trying to find traditional financing? I suggested, the idea forming as I spoke it aloud. I have access to capital and I understand the business well enough to be a meaningful partner. His expression shifted from desperate calculation to amazed possibility as he processed what I was proposing. The woman he had fired for insubordination was offering to become his business partner in saving the company from dissolution. "You want to buy half of Thompson Digital Solutions?" he asked, his tone reflecting disbelief at the reversal of our professional relationship. "Jessica, a week ago, I was your boss. Now you're talking about becoming my business partner?" Week ago, you didn't understand the value of modern marketing analytics," I replied, gesturing toward the dashboard systems that had saved his relationship with Austin Tech Innovations. "Now you're seeing what's possible when strategy matches market requirements." The negotiation that followed established terms that reflected both the company's current limitations and its potential for growth under different management. I would acquire 51% ownership for $350,000, assuming operational control while Marcus retained significant equity and responsibility for existing client relationships. The partnership structure we developed leveraged our complementary strengths. Marcus's established client relationships and operational experience, combined with my strategic expertise and modern marketing capabilities. Thompson Digital Solutions would be transformed from a struggling traditional agency into a modernized firm capable of competing for sophisticated clients. The legal paperwork was completed within a week, with Sophia providing contract review and ensuring that the ownership transition protected my interests while treating Marcus fairly. The entire family attended the signing ceremony at the restaurant, treating the occasion as a celebration of entrepreneurial success rather than just a business transaction. 6 months ago, you were worried about Jessica keeping a stable job, Sophia observed to our parents while reviewing the final partnership documents. Now she owns a marketing agency and employs her former boss. The transformation felt surreal even to me, but it also represented the logical conclusion of choosing entrepreneurship over employment security. By refusing to accept limitations imposed by other people's vision of my potential, I had created opportunities that wouldn't have existed within traditional career structures. Marcus adapted to our reversed relationship with surprising grace, bringing enthusiasm to the process of modernizing Thompson Digital Solutions that I had never seen during my employment. The company that had once fired me for proposing improvements now implemented those same strategies under my ownership and direction. Austin Tech Innovations became our flagship success story, generating referrals to other technology companies that needed sophisticated marketing analytics and performance-driven campaign management. Within 6 months, our client base had doubled, and our average project value had increased by 70%. The restaurant marketing campaign that had launched my consulting career continued to generate impressive results, becoming a case study for how modern digital marketing could transform small business performance. Carlos had seen a 30% increase in new customers and was planning expansion to a second location. Danny eventually left his position at the restaurant to join Thompson Digital Solutions as operations manager, bringing his customer service expertise and practical business knowledge to our growing agency. The professional partnership between siblings who had once disagreed about career strategies proved surprisingly effective. The morning I walked into my own office as owner rather than employee of Thompson Digital Solutions, I reflected on how dramatically my life had changed since the day Marcus handed me termination papers. The skills he had dismissed as insubordinate had become the foundation for business success that exceeded anything I could have achieved through traditional employment. The family that had once worried about my job security now sought my advice about their own business decisions. The expertise that had been undervalued by my former employer now commanded respect from clients who paid premium rates for strategic consultation and implementation. Most importantly, I had learned that professional validation comes not from meeting other people's expectations, but from creating value that speaks for itself through measurable results. The marketing agency I now owned proved daily that innovation and excellence could overcome any temporary setback or professional disappointment. Standing in the conference room where Marcus had once fired me for suggesting the very improvements that had saved his business, I understood that entrepreneurship wasn't just about building companies or generating revenue. It was about having the courage to bet on your own capabilities when everyone else underestimates your potential. The transformation from fired employee to business owner had taken exactly 3 months, proving that sometimes the most devastating professional setbacks are actually the catalyst for achievements that wouldn't have been possible through conventional career progression. The family that had laughed at my unemployment stopped laughing when I bought the company that had dismissed me, but their surprise was nothing compared to my own amazement at what became possible when I finally stopped seeking permission to pursue my own vision of success. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.